Hi, everyone. If you are tuning in, thanks for joining us. I'm Dr. Kate Balestrieri, and this is Get Naked with Dr. Kate. I'm here with Claudia Vera. Claudia is Modern Intimacy's digital media coordinator. She's an amazing human and about to start applying to grad school to become a therapist herself. And Claudia is going to be having a cool conversation with me and helping me answer some listener questions today while we also experiment with going live on YouTube. So if it's a little bit choppy, forgive us. We're learning as we go. Claudia, thanks for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
It's time to get naked with Dr. Kate. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Balestrieri, a Beverly Hills-based psychologist, certified sex therapist, and the founder of Modern Intimacy, a national therapy group. So let's dive into all things sex, relationships, mental health, and answer your questions with practical solutions and real answers. Each week, I'll share insights to help you build a healthy relationship with yourself, with other people, and with your sexuality. It's time to start thriving authentically. So let's get naked. And if you like this podcast, hit the download button so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to leave 5 stars and a review. I've been really excited about this. I know we've talked a lot about how many amazing questions we get from listeners, and I'm thrilled to take a beat and answer some of them with you. Is there anything you want people to know about you before we get started?
Oh boy. I think I think you covered it right now. I'm deep in grad school applications, so it feels kind of like that's my identity at the moment. But yeah, I love all things sex, sexuality, pleasure. So hence why I love working with this team, and I'm excited to talk about some of these questions and hear what you have to say about them.
Amazing. Well, shall we jump in? What's the first question?
Yeah, let's do it. So, the first question we have is, why is it that I can't get aroused unless someone is watching?
What a great question. So this sort of speaks to a fantasy around exhibitionism. And a lot of people think that exhibitionism is automatically illegal and bad or wrong, but it's not. I mean, the term has legal implications if this is done non-consensually, but for a lot of folks, the fantasy of being watched is really powerful. And I think for a lot of people, the fantasies around things like, wow, they desire me so much that they're watching me, or there's a bit of a worship fantasy that can come into place for some people. For some folks, being watched is about doing something really naughty and being super taboo and getting away with it. So there can be a bit of a power dynamic at play in some instances. So what I hear in this question also, though, is a question of why can't I get aroused unless? And what that tells me is that perhaps this person has more of a fixed arousal pattern. And what that means is they have kind of a narrower scope of things that turn them on. And that can be true for a lot of people. And it doesn't make anything about their desires wrong or bad. But for some people, they've maybe just sort of had a more narrow exposure to different sexual things and fantasies, so they don't necessarily know what else might turn them on. And for some people, they have experimented with a lot of other ideas, but for whatever reason, there's only one or two things that really carry a lot of erotic charge for them. So it's hard to know specifically where that fixed arousal comes in for this person and how much other exploration they've done. But if you're somebody that does feel like your scope of things that feel really sexually exciting is a little bit more narrow than you would want it to be, you can always make it a practice to put that kind of sexual activity down for a while and create more possibilities for your brain and your body to organize around different pleasure experiences. It can take some time, but often when you stop doing one thing for a while and start practicing others, you'll learn that your body can actually adapt to different kinds of pleasure. So it might be worthwhile experimenting with that if you're feeling distressed about having a more fixed path to pleasure right now.
Is there a difference between the idea of exhibitionism because and voyeurism, because when I typically hear someone likes to be watched, is the voyeur the person who would be doing the watching? Um,
Mhm.
is that where that would come in? And then exhibitionism is potentially like the people who are wanting to be watched?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got it right. Somebody who likens themselves to be a voyeur is somebody who wants to see, who wants to watch,
Mm,
who wants to be on that side of this experience. And the person who's more organized around being witnessed is the person sitting, standing, or doing anything that is being exhibited and observed by other people. Right. So, again, there can be legal implications if there's not consent for this behavior. But in consenting dynamics, it's really healthy and really wonderful sometimes to be watched or to see someone being sexual, right? It gives us a lot of ways to play with things like power or um, desire or vulnerability. I think for a lot of folks, exhibiting gives them a contained space in which to be observed in a very vulnerable state. And they may not have the ability to do that in other contexts of their lives. Be vulnerable, I mean, not
mm.
exhibit.
Makes sense. That's so interesting. I can imagine that there might be some potential crossover or parallels with things like cucking or having individuals and having partners watching, just some maybe some overlap or some connections there as well.
Yeah, sometimes there can be, right? We can have more than one kink and more than one fantasy that coalesce and go well together. And definitely for some folks, being in the role of a cuckold or being in the role of a stag watching their partner with another partner, it can it can create all kinds of dynamics around feeling jealous, feeling vulnerable, feeling excited, feeling proud for a partner. And so being in the position of someone who's watching another can allow someone again a really contained space to play with some of those emotions or experience them differently and be able to process them with their partner later. So it can be really connecting and joining, which might seem paradoxical to some people when they think about introducing another lover into their dynamic.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But I think the way that you just walked us through it is a great way to see how it can be a connective experience as well. All right, this one's a little long, so bear with me. So they write, my partner disclosed to me that he does have a serial fantasy of having a threesome that includes me. He also mentioned the type of woman and body types he prefers when thinking of having a threesome. I'm open to it, however, I do have many concerns, and I'll name two of them. I'm feeling insecure because now I'm comparing my body to a woman's body he prefers. Is he not sexually satisfied with me or satisfied with my body type? Would he still have sexual desire for me? Will he change towards me? I'm looking at this from an emotional view and not from a sexual pleasure view. At
Mm.
this moment, I'm feeling very overwhelmed. I'm happy he's open with me and wants to try this with me. However, emotionally, I don't think I'm there and would like to work on this.
Yeah. Wow, I really appreciate this person's vulnerability and their willingness to explore kind of what their own breaks might be in considering opening up their relationship to threesomes. Let's go question by question. Well, first, they talk about sort of just this idea of threesomes. And I want to normalize that probably one of the biggest fantasies. In fact, I think it was the number one fantasy um, that was reported in a study of about 4,000 Americans conducted by Justin Lehmiller a couple of years ago. The number one fantasy was group sex. So it's really common for people to want to be sexual with more than one person at a time. And it is not necessarily an indication that that monogamous dynamic or that dyadic sexual experience is not enough for them, right? I think we kind of have this idea in our minds that we have to fulfill our partner's every want or every need in order to be a good enough partner. And I just don't think that's realistic. And people like different kinds of sexual activities, and it does not need to mean anything about how they feel about their partner. Now, sometimes it does because people are not communicating either with themselves or their partner accurately or honestly about what their real intentions are. So I understand this person's concern. Um, it can be kind of a way to bypass having hard conversationships in relationships. Conversationships? Did I just say that?
Yeah, but I liked my brain didn't even register that that was, not a word, so
I'm going with it. It's a new word.
yeah.
Um, But yeah, so I mean, it might be a bypass, right, for a conversation that this partner doesn't want to have with their partner about something that may not be working. So I think when people have these concerns, it's really important to kind of sit with what is my fear around this and can I hold space for that while also bringing it to my partner and saying, hey, can we break this down a little bit more? I would love to understand from you, what are you looking for in this experience? Right? What does it mean to you that we bring other people into it? What do you get from that that is different than what we do together? What's the meaning that you attach to these different body types that you like? And how do you feel about my body type? Can we be honest about that with each other? Um, I think in many relationships, there is a desire to protect each other's feelings, and that's great to an extent. But if there's an inauthenticity happening, it can really undermine a sense of trust in the process. And partners generally can feel something when there's an inauthenticity happening in conversations like this. Um, so it's not necessarily a guarantee that he is unsatisfied with this partner's body type or with the sex that they have together, right? We should really look at sexual activities as not a zero sum game. And opening up to new partners can be really enhancing to the sexual experience of partners that have been together for a long time because you can observe how your partner interacts differently with someone else and later talk about that. What did you like about how this person did that, or that person touched you here, or this person did this in this way? And what elements of that felt interesting, and what can we incorporate into our sex life together? So, for couples who feel really secure with each other, it can be a great way to learn new ways of accessing pleasure together and enhancing their own dyadic experience. Her next question, will he still have sexual desire for me? I wish I could give a definitive answer to this question, but unfortunately, there's some risk involved in playing with other people. And as much as you can plan for it and prepare for it, you just can't know for certain how you're going to feel or how your partner is going to feel during or after the experience. So, what I would say is that it's possible that his desire may change. It's also possible that your desires may change. It's possible that you'll see something and want more of that that you never could have expected. It's also possible that you'll see something and decide, I absolutely am not interested in that moving forward. So, if you go into it from a place of curiosity together, hopefully these conversations can be a lot more transparent when you're debriefing afterward. If you trust your partner's responses with you and you trust that you both can be transparent, even if there is something that's changed, many times couples can work through that. Yeah. And will he change toward me? Again, it's possible. And maybe you'll change toward him. And maybe those changes will be really positive and enhancing in your relationship. And maybe they won't. And unfortunately, that is part of the risk that comes with this. But if you're feeling this way, I think it's a really great opportunity to talk with your partner about what is going well in your relationship and what isn't. How secure do you both feel before you introduce a third into your bedroom? And can it be a starting point for deeper conversations? And that's where threesomes can actually enhance the emotional connection that partners have together.
Absolutely. What I'm hearing a lot is just the importance of communication, whether it's prior to enacting the fantasy. And I know a lot of times we also talk about not every fantasy has to be enacted in real life. And so there can be a lot of discussion beforehand about what would this look like? What would you like to do all together? Like almost act out the fantasy
Yeah,
through talking with your partner, and see how that feels first before inviting an actual human being in. Talking about the process of choosing the third. How much would this writer like to be involved in that process? What would that provide for them in terms of feeling a little more like part of the process, part of the experience? And then, of course, debriefing afterwards about how you feel. And the debriefing can be immediately afterwards, and then a few days, few weeks. We don't know how long things process within us after an experience. And so I think, yeah, all of that sounds like a risk, but a risk that can be really rewarding as well.
it can be. Yeah. The term debriefing is really frequently used in the kink space and in the non-monogamy space. Understandably, it's super important to break down how was this for both partners, and what did you learn about yourself, and what are you curious about within yourself and for your partner, and can it be the starting point for what I sort of think of as an integration, right? Because
Mm.
to your point, a debriefing conversation may happen once, but the integration of that experience is something that's going to be ongoing. And there's a lot to be said for who the third is that you invite in, and how different one experience might be from another experience with a different partner. Um, so if you have a negative experience once or twice, it might be okay to continue trying new experiences with different partners, because there are a lot of variables in the mix when you have three people with three different sets of desires, needs, and boundaries having an experience together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm hoping the best for this writer.
I am too. I am too. And look, it's really normal to have these questions come up and to feel insecure in the process and to feel doubts and uncertainties. So I really hope that they give themselves a lot of grace and a lot of permission to ask for the security that they need from their partner to feel like they can move forward.
Absolutely. I think it's easy, potentially easy to feel like, oh, am I not ready? Am I not quote unquote evolved enough? Am I not open enough? Why am I feeling these insecurities? But I think it is important to note that that's a very normal response.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Should we jump into question number 3?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay. So this person asks, why do we, in the beginning, feel the need/want and desire for sex, and then after some time it goes away? For example, for every relationship I've been in the beginning, I'm very interested in having sex and being turned on by them, but later I feel like I can't even make myself attracted to them. I know a lot of my other female friends have this problem, and we've all never been able to hold down long term relationships and just end up chasing the next relationship because we're usually shamed and made to feel like something is wrong with us for not wanting a partner sexually anymore. It feels impossible to explain to them what's going on when we don't know either. Is it a vulnerability issue, or is it boredom, or are we actually broken?
Oof, I can really hear the
Mm.
pain in that question. Well, let's start with that. This person is not broken, right? There's no such thing as broken when we're talking about how we are in relationship with people and how we experience ourselves. Um, Even if there's trauma that underlies our behavior or our response to something, that word broken just feels so hard. But I think about a couple of things. Like, one, there are some pretty distinct phases of long-term partnership that we go through that are based on different drives that carry different importance at different times in our lives, especially in the arc of a long-term partnership. Dr. Helen Fisher did a lot of research around this, And what she's discerned is that sort of there are these three phases in relationships that are pretty common to the map and the arc of all relationships that extend in the long term. So the first stage is the lust phase. And it makes sense, right? Like we don't really have a lot of motivation to get together unless we want to be together for some reason. So lust is a great way to overcome all of the inhibitions that might otherwise keep us more boundaried from people. But that lust phase lasts from about 2 weeks or so to about 9 months or so, give or take. These are not hard and fast time periods. But in this initial lust phase, or in the initial phase of the relationship, our lust drive is primarily in the driver's seat. And it's governed by a lot of dopamine, a lot of testosterone, a lot of estrogen. And it's really, there to keep us carnal with one another and keep us really attracted. And over time, well, in that phase, there's a lot of novelty. We're just getting to know this person. So that's where that dopamine kicks in and it's really exciting. But over time, we do start to get to know someone. And as we get to know them, the dopamine in our relationship or in our brain starts to wear off a bit. And we enter into the next phase of the long term relationship, which is really governed by limerence or romance, right? And in this next phase of the long term relationship, it's really about joining, merging, creating a we from a you and a me. And that marks also a shift in a couple of things. One, when you know someone for a longer period of time, you know more about them. There's less novelty. So there's less intensity in this phase with lust. So lust starts to drop off as the merging becomes more important, the romance, the connection. There are different neurochemicals that are more active during this phase. And that sort of dopamine and the estrogen and the testosterone kind of taper down a little bit, especially, well, there are peaks of it with like big milestones, novel
Mhm.
milestones, like moving in together, getting married, having an engagement party, getting pregnant. And once you've sort of gone through the list of new things that we do together, um, you kind of know your partner a lot more and you habituate to them. So again, lust tapers off. And that phase lasts for about 9 months up to 2 years. Again, not a hard and fast period, but pretty common length of time. And after that, our attachment drive starts taking over. And this is where we really like root into that connection and we're looking for safety and security. And the neurochemicals in the brain that are associated more with this drive are things like oxytocin and vasopressin, these trust and bonding inducing chemicals. So we might feel a lot safer and a lot closer, but there's not enough air sometimes in that safety and closeness for lust to percolate, right? In order to feel that safety, we need more familiarity. And with that familiarity comes more closeness. And then the Venn diagram starts looking like a circle, right? Where
Yeah.
I know my partner so well. They know me so well. We blend into the wallpaper. We've habituated to each other's quirks and our things and our traits. So there's not as much novelty to keep us curious with
Yeah.
each other. So when people get to that phase, lust can be tricky to cultivate without a little bit more space, more individuality, individuation, and a rediscovering of self over and over again. And with the renewal of self comes a constant space in the relationship, a constant unknown, where you can then build that erotic tension back. Because if you're going out and doing all these fun things, either with me or separate from me, wow, I'm learning something about you over and over again. I'm rediscovering you and that's cool. And that creates opportunities for lust and that erotic tension to be alive again in long-term partnerships. But a couple of things that can happen that can make that stage a little bit more complicated and the process of recultivating lust more complicated are things like having trauma in your early life,
Mhm.
especially enmeshment trauma, where closeness meant that you had to really, really protect yourself, especially around things like covert incest or having inappropriate sexual boundaries or emotional boundaries in your early caregiving years. that can make intimacy and closeness feel really unsafe for people. So sometimes when they get to that stage, they pull back and even have a bit of a disgust response or an aversion to closeness. And so if that's something that people are feeling, I would say, you might want to explore that a little bit more deeply, because it can create a lot of complexity with building intimacy in the long term with anyone. It's not impossible, but it may be something that needs a little bit of attention from you before you can learn how to make space for boundaries in a relationship that really help you feel safe and connected.
Makes a lot of sense. And, it's funny, the outlining, especially of the role of self in this,
Mhm.
is something that I feel like intrinsically maybe I knew, but haven't really thought about or sat with. This idea that creating space to know yourself and to constantly evolve yourself then opens up space within a partnership for the two of you to learn new things because you're learning new things about yourself. I think there's this kind of notion that once you are over the quote unquote honeymoon phase, like the relationship can get boring. And there's discussions of boring equals safety. And like you just have to be okay with the boredom because it means that things are safe. But it sounds like, based on what you're saying, that while there is a more secure kind of attachment phase that comes along, and there are these points for novelty, that it doesn't necessarily have to mean that you just have to make peace with the fact that we're in this stage and we're going to be quote unquote bored together. It sounds like there's always going to be moments for learning more, for having novelty, but it might just not be this like intense up and spiking that we're used to. And I'm sure also a person's experiences in prior relationships, whether they're quote unquote like determined relationships or in these murky situationship
Mm.
experiences, perhaps if they've had a lot of relationships where it's really intense and then there's these really big pitfalls, something that might feel more secure might feel like, oh, but this is boring. I'm not feeling like I'm stimulated by this. It's important to see also like what that space of stability can offer,
Mhm.
especially if you've never experienced it before or haven't given it a chance to experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you're bringing that up. And for a lot of people who grew up in chaotic or unpredictable or frenetic households, their neurobiological interpretation of love does involve a lot of intensity shifts. And when they reach this point in their relationship where things are more stable, you are trusting each other, it can feel really incongruent with what you're used to. And we often misattribute that incongruence to mean that it's a poor fit in terms of how good are we as partners together. So, definitely, I mean, people who struggle with vulnerability or intimacy may be mistaking what they're feeling as a lack of compatibility. But actually, it's an indication that their nervous system is starting to heal and they don't
Hmm.
necessarily know what that looks like because they haven't had that experience of healing or feeling safe enough in relationships yet.
What would you suggest for an individual who feels like they're in a partnership right now and they're kind of on that precipice where they're feeling like the lust and the grandiosity and the honeymoon is starting to wane and they can feel themselves pulling away? Do you have any tips or just words of comfort in that moment where they're noticing that split?
Yeah, I would say that ambivalence is really normal in healthy relationships. So if you're sort of sitting with one foot in I feel good about this and one foot in a this feels really annoying and frustrating and I'm ready to bolt camp emotionally, that's to be expected, right? We as humans love to squeal around in ambivalence because it keeps us protected from making a decision that may have consequences we don't like. So I would just say, like, give yourself a lot of permission to be curious for long swaths of time. If you don't know what you make of how you feel, maybe work with a therapist to kind of break down some of what could be going on for you. It may or may not help you make a decision. And maybe there's no decision to be made, right? Maybe the decision is to do nothing and stick it out. But if that stops feeling like the best possible outcome or solution for you, it is okay to start making other choices about your life. Like we get to let our bodies inform us of what is making sense in the next right step in our lives. But it is important to be curious about the information we're getting from
Mm.
that biofeedback and not make rash or impulsive decisions about it. For example, a lot of folks, when they get to this stage, will experience what's called near sense avoidance, meaning that like sensory stimuli from their partner actually evoke an avoidance or an aversion response in them.
Mm.
And sometimes that can feel like disgust, right? I go through this sometimes with my partner and I feel so terrible because
Yeah.
it's not about them, it's about me. And my body's telling me, "You need a little space, you need a boundary. There's something going on that feels intrusive right now." And it's not that there are any boundaries being crossed. I haven't really created any boundaries in those moments,
Mm.
right? So it's an
Mhm.
indication for me that I've got to take care of myself a little differently and say, "You know what? I'm feeling overwhelmed and overstimulated, and I just sort of need some space right now." And being able to know what that data in my body means for me allows me to communicate with my partner so that they can actually meet me. And that strengthens the relationship, right? And creates more intimacy. So when partners learn how to give vocabulary to what they're experiencing somatically, then they can start to figure out, okay, I've done the advocating. I've asked for space or I've asked for closeness. I've talked to my partner about this and things feel better. Wow. I actually want to be with them again. And that's really empowering, right? Sometimes you do all that work and you're like, nope, it's just not a good fit. Like we just can't get on the same track and my feelings have legitimately changed. Right? So really taking the time to get to know yourself and what your bodily cues mean in those moments and your emotional cues mean can be super important in helping you guide a path forward.
I love what you're saying about not judging yourself because I think when we do have that judgment, it is kind of a straight path then to doing a more impulsive decision. Because if we think to ourselves, or the feeling I'm exhibiting or the feeling I'm holding has shame around it, therefore I want to get rid of that as quickly as possible. So I'm going to make a decision as fast as possible and not think through it because the more I sit with it, the more uncomfortable I feel. But what it sounds like is especially what you're saying about, was it
Your sense avoidance.
near sense avoidance, to know that that can come up in relationships as kind of a little indicator of, hey, I need to tune into myself versus I know I felt it in my impulses. Oh my gosh, I'm awful, I'm horrible, like this person, they're not doing anything wrong. It feels like it's something in my head. To know that it can just act as a marker of, hey, tune in. What do you need? And how can your partner kind of help you meet that need? I think is really important and probably really helpful for this person to hear that it doesn't make them broken. It's actually a very normal response in the template of a long-term relationship.
Completely, completely. As much as you might care about your partner, being around them 24/7 can get really overwhelming. And that could really be amplified for people who have experienced trauma or betrayal in previous relationships, or people who are maybe more sensitive to being overstimulated emotionally or physiologically. And it's okay to source what that means and ask your partner to help you kind of find a different balance.
I think this is going to be extremely helpful for this person.
I hope so. Thank you for reading these questions and gathering them. It's always so important to me that our podcast is a source of feedback for people and answers for people and kind of helps them make sense of wherever they might be in their world right now.
I know for myself, as someone who's a part of this recording right now, it was really helpful for me to hear this information and just kind of talk through it with you. So I hope that the listeners experience that as well.
Oh, well, thank you. And thanks for joining me today, Claudia, and facilitating this. Will you do it
Of
again?
course. Yes, absolutely. I would love to.
Amazing. All right, everyone. Well, stay tuned for the next episode. Send in your questions, as always, to question@getnakedpodcast.com, or you can click the link in our show notes to submit your own questions. And I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Get Naked with Dr. Kate. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Dr. Kate Balestrieri. and on YouTube at Modern Intimacy. If you have questions you want answered on the podcast, feel free to email me at question@getnakedpodcast.com. Our Modern Intimacy team is here to help you and to provide you with support. Feel free to schedule a free 30-minute consultation at the link in our show notes. And don't forget to join our newsletter for insights, surveys, and articles sent directly to your inbox. You can sign up at modernintimacy.com/newsletter. New episodes drop every Tuesday. I'll see you next week. Disclaimer, this podcast is not a substitute for therapy and does not constitute a professional relationship with me, Dr. Kate, or with Modern Intimacy. This podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only.